It's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the lack of tolerance. That's the lack of diversity. That's the non-Jews are not as good as us, that they have souls that come from a place that's not pure, that they're rooted in a lower creation almost. I mean, you know, if you were going to look at the old evolution, except that you wouldn't view it as evolution because they don't believe in evolution. But if you were ranking, you know, human beings and creation, right? So you would have Jews, this is them. Jews are on top, right? Then you've got non-Jews, then you have the great apes, then you have, right? And it goes down like this to rocks, right? What's to discuss? People call me an anti-Semite all the time. They call me a Nazi all the time. There's a guy that's been leaving comments lately comparing me to capos, who were the head of in the concentration camps and the death camps. There were Jews who cooperated with the Nazis in terms of running the camp.
What about the argument that your website helps the anti-Semitic argument or something? I mean, you've heard that.
Oh yeah, all the time.
What about all that?
My answer to it is, first of all, the Jews, the ultra-Orthodox Jews that are committing the crimes are the people who are helping the anti-Semites. So anyway, what grabbed me was the family situation. To come for a Friday night or a Saturday meal and have an entire family sitting around a table with friends and other guests and people talking about real issues and it's not, in most places you go, most times you go out, what you end up with is small talk. When you went to lunch or dinner at a Chabad family's house, you talked about important issues, or issues that people thought were important at least, so they were involved in it, whether it be Israeli politics or American politics or religious issues, but you were talking about something that had some import to it. And that attracted me a lot, and just seeing it around with the kids and everyone in that kind of a very nice family situation, at least on the surface, that's what really got me.
Okay, and why did you get out? What happened? What was the process?
It's interesting. It's a long process. It started just after I got in. I was very involved in trying to save Ethiopian Jews. And early in my involvement with Chabad, I went to the local rabbi who was my friend at that point, and I said, you know, we really need to get Chabad involved in doing something about this. He said, I can't make any independent decisions. You have to, you know, contact New York, write the Rebbe and have him, you know, the grand rabbi, have him make the decision. So I wrote a letter and didn't get an answer. I waited, I don't know, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it was. And then I wrote another letter that was much less nice. First letter had been pretty fawning and very nice. Second letter was pretty much, here's the problem. It's very much like what was going on in the early part of the Holocaust. You know, if Chabad isn't helping in these particular areas, why not? And we talked about each thing and said, if not, why not? Are you, you know, because they were refusing things like we needed student visas. If we had student visas, we could get out, you know, not a lot of people, we could get 10, 15 people out with student visas. So we needed visas, they wouldn't give us visas. So there was, if you're not doing this, why not? So I sent that in, and I sent it with a return receipt and certified mail, the whole thing, so I you know what happened to it, and didn't get an answer. So I went in to see the local rabbi after about a month and said, 5 weeks, whatever, and said, you know, I'm out of here. That's it. I'm not gonna, here's my little charity box, here's, you know, I'm not dealing with you people anymore. If you can't answer a letter like that, then I'm not dealing with it. And so I was convinced to hang on a little bit and wait, and nothing happened. Then I was convinced to wait while the rabbi called one of the secretaries of the Rebbe in New York to try to get an answer. And I was told that the Rebbe had read my letter and that he wanted me to go to a major rabbinic figure in New York who was like the leading judge of Jewish law in, at least for sure in America, but probably in the world at that point, and go to him and see what he says about the issue. And I should do that. And as for the rest of the things he talked about, that I had written in the letter, I should do whatever I can do to help Jews, whether they be in Minnesota or elsewhere. That was the basic line. And I thought this was pretty wishy-washy. It was not a strong response. It wasn't good. But it was just enough to keep me from walking out, unfortunately. So I went to that rabbi he told me to, and the rabbi said, you know, I've ruled on this before. They have to be saved. And I told him we need another ruling, and there were problems. And so he wrote another ruling, which I have posted on my website. This would have been 83. And anyway, and I went on doing what I was doing, but I stayed within Chabad. And 20 years after that incident where the letter didn't really get answered and I got that oral response, the leading Lubavitch magazine in the world, it's called Kfar Chabad magazine. It's based in Israel in a town called Kfar Chabad, which is named after the Chabad movement. Printed the letter the Rebbe wrote me that I never received. It had probably been taken by one of the secretaries and hidden because the fear that because I was involved with the World Union of Jewish Students and other student groups that I would have, you know, brought 100 students in front of their world headquarters and made a demonstration. So they were afraid of that. They were afraid of how it would affect things on campus, what we could do to them, how we could hurt them, keep them off campuses. So anyway, the letter was in a file, and the Rebbe had passed away, and the secretaries involved in the immediate writing of the letter had passed away. The file was there. It was printed in Kfar Chabad magazine, translated into Hebrew, with my name blacked out, so you couldn't tell who it was written to, but it said St. Paul, Minnesota 55116. So the guys are sitting around in the synagogue saying, who the hell would write a letter like this? The Rebbe would respond this way because it was such a nasty response. And so I was asked by the rabbi if I wrote this. And I said, I probably did write the letter that he's responding to. And I said, I can't tell you for sure. I'd have to go back in my files to look, it's only 20 years ago. But all I can tell you for sure is I did write a letter that I didn't get a written response to. And the phraseology went, if not, why not? If you're not doing this thing, why not? So the rabbi screams, it's your letter, right? So he was very excited because in the Hasidic world, this is a big deal. You can be a jerk, but you get something unusual out of the Rebbe, that's a big deal, right? So he gave me a copy of the magazine, and I sat with my study partner. I was studying to be a rabbi, and we translated it back from Hebrew into English. And we got about 4 paragraphs into it. And we just looked at each other and both like in shock. And then I looked at this guy and I said, the Rebbe was insane. I mean, this is nuts. This has no bearing in Jewish law. This is nutty. This is something that no one claiming to be representative of Jewish law could write this letter. Nobody could. And I finished the translation, took one look at it and said, this is, the man was, if anybody had any questions about whether he was rooted in reality or not, whether he was truly a good man or not, whether he was any type of really special human being or not, read this letter with my letter, and you can see right away what he was. Because the Rebbe played a little trick where instead of referring to Ethiopian Jews, he kept referring to the matter I was talking about. So you don't know until you see my letter what that matter is. So that's what happened. And after about a month, Lubavitchers who knew that I had both of these letters wanted me to put them up on the internet so that people could see them, not because of the negative aspect, but because of the historical aspect. I didn't want to do it because I wasn't interested in having that fight. And but they said they were going to put up. They had copies of my letter because they'd asked to see it, so they were going to just do it. So I said, okay, well, I'm not going to lose control over it. That doesn't make any sense at all. So I put up what became my blog. That's how it started. That's how I left Lubavitch. I got thrown out from all of that.
And what a fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my projects was to photograph the Ethiopian refugees. This is in 1992.
Yeah,
right
so you did the
that,
ones after
Aliyah,
Operation Solomon, yeah.
Right, yeah, one
Right.
of those, I forget the name of it.
I worked on Operation Moses. I didn't do much on Solomon.
You were in it?
But I know the person who did all of the stuff in Ethiopia for Operation Solomon, Susan Pollack, is a friend of mine. And Rudy Boschwitz, of course, I worked with a lot in the early 80s and with his office. And And it was a senator from Minnesota, of course, and he was the point man for Operation Solomon for Bush. Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask you, I have some general questions and then get to Postville.
Yeah,
please.
sure.
But what are some of the central tenets of Chabad? I mean, for the person who's coming out of the blue, that they ought to know about. I mean, there's a million things. I'm
The
sure.
real ones or the spin ones?
Both. I mean, what's your experience?
Okay, what they claim to be is a group that loves all Jews, right? So it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how observant you are, it doesn't matter what you know about Judaism, what you don't know, how involved in anything you are or not. Everybody is pretty much equal. That's the claim, okay? The reality is that that's the way they get people involved. And while their Hasidic theology does have an element of that, in reality, when it comes down to who gets jobs, who gets whatever is being doled out, resources of any kind, it's always people from the inner core families, the ones that are descended from the first Chabad Rebbe, and then it breaks down in layers after that, the ones that were around during the time of the third Chabad Rebbe, right? When you get to the ones that are very recent, they get less. Even if they're Lubavitch rabbis representing communities, they get treated much worse than somebody who's from one of the more special families. So the reality is that it's full of nepotism, a lot of infighting. You have people who, something that I'd never seen anywhere else before, but I see a lot with ultra-Orthodoxy and especially in Chabad, is that you can have a room full of Chabad rabbis. And you'll see this here, if you look. Room full of Chabad rabbis who all know each other. It's a small community. They all are quote-unquote friends, but none of them are really friends with each other. You know, they all study alone. The general thing in ultra-Orthodoxy, and even in Orthodoxy, is you study with a study partner. But you never see this. In all the years I lived here, you never see two rabbis sitting across the table trying to study a Hasidic or a Talmudic text or something. You don't see that. Doesn't happen in the synagogue, doesn't happen in their homes. You know, occasionally there's a public class and they have to, you know, a lot of people are there. But the reality is that it's a missionary group that is bent on making as many Jews as observant as they can possibly do, because in their theology, the more Torah commandments Jews do, the closer the Messiah is. And doing those things can bring the Messiah. And of course the Messiah is their now dead Rebbe. So they're attempting to bring him back, and so he will lead all the Jews into Israel and usher in the age of the Messianic redemption.
They still believe in
Sure.
Rabbi Schneerson?
Yes, they still think he's, a large section of them think he's alive in some form or another. Whether that be literally alive, which is a small group, to alive in the sense that because he's not confined to a body, he can therefore be every place at the same time. If you read some of their stuff, he sounds almost omnipresent and omnipotent, which only God can supposedly be in Jewish theology. They're very much like early Christianity, what it was before it split from Judaism. It seems to be very similar to in belief systems in that.
Could you describe what's Lag BaOmer? I photographed their parade.
Oh, Lag BaOmer. I have to be careful how I say this. I'm just going to say it. It's a made-up holiday. Well, here's the story. There was apparently some type of a plague that started roughly at the time of Passover and ended roughly at the time of the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, which is what Lag stands for. Lag is Lamed Gimel, which is 33 in Rabbinic Hebrew. The numbers mean 33. So, I should say the letters mean 33. So anyway, it's a celebration of that, and also it's the date of the death of Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the first Kabbalistic, I put this in quotation mark, Kabbalistic sage who lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era. So it's the date of his death. And so they make a celebration of his life on this day.
And what's so special about him, above all others?
He's like the foundational rabbi of the Kabbalistic part of Judaism, in theory. What he is in reality is a different story. I mean, most things attributed to him were written much later, just like most of the Zohar, which is the fundamental text of the Kabbalah, was written in the 14th century, 13th century, whatever it was, of the Common Era, not in the 2nd century of the Common Era. So.
How is Chabad different than other Orthodox Jewish belief, and how is it the same? Where's the overlap and where do they part ways?
It's the same in the sense that they believe that, the different commandments that are laid out in rabbinic literature and derived from the Torah have to be followed. And so their life is centered around following those commandments. In that sense, they're the same. How they're different is how they view Messianism. All Orthodox Jewish groups believe that there will be a Messiah, and that Messiah is going to have a name, be a human being, and But Chabad takes it much further than that, and believes they know who that Messiah is, and that they are the true path to making that Messiah come. They also believe they're the closest thing to authentic Judaism that exists, while other parts of the Hasidic movement and other parts of Orthodoxy are less authentic.
How would you describe your website? What's that about?
I don't know. That's a complicated question. It started, as I told you, right, just to put up those letters, and then I realized that it was a blog, and nobody knew in 2004. I was using Blogger then. Nobody knew in 2004 if Blogger was going to let a dormant blog sit there. I mean, space on servers were a lot more expensive then, right? And nobody knew if you didn't post in a day or two or in a week or two, what was going to happen. Was Blogger going to take it down? So I started posting stories about Chabad that were in newspapers. So it was coming close to the Rebbe's 10th Yortzeit, the 10th anniversary of his death. So I started posting stories related to that, and then it grew to what you have today. And what it is, I think, for the last 4 years, is a vehicle to expose problems within ultra-Orthodoxy, not just Chabad, but within all of ultra-Orthodoxy, and a little bit within modern Orthodoxy as well, in order to try to bring change. There's a major problem with child sexual abuse in the ultra-Orthodox community. It's very similar to what was going on with the Catholic Church and that problem. And so I played I don't want to say a key role, but an important role in exposing that and in keeping the issue on the front burner so that there could be some level of change. There's not a lot of change, but there is some, and it's becoming harder to alibi for these guys. And that's been a major issue.
So it seems fundamentally it's critical, it's unflattering, it's muckraking, it's an expose.
Well, I've been called all of that and worse. I don't know. I don't make anything up. The only legitimate complaint against me is that it's out of context, in the sense that I don't spend a lot of space and a lot of time putting up stories about some 82-year-old ultra-Orthodox woman that bakes cookies for her sick neighbor's kids or something, right? I don't spend a lot of time doing the good stories, because there are lots and lots and lots of newspapers, and that should be in heavy quotation marks, because they're not really newspapers, and websites from the ultra-Orthodox community that only print the good and have no reference to the bad whatsoever, none. And even the ones that are considered critical and that are attacked from within by the leadership from within only print very limited critical things and often neuter the story, so you don't know for sure who they're talking about. The names are taken out, the places are taken out. There was a big thing where these sites were taking stories from the AP, from New York Post, from whatever, not saying where they were getting the stories from, changing the content of the stories a little bit. So you didn't have the names in there, you didn't have the important information in there, and you just knew that something generally bad had happened in relationship to somebody who's one of our people probably. And they were posting that without any links or attribution. And I helped stop that. But it's a community that doesn't do introspection very well. And they don't look at their problems and try to fix it in any way. Modern Orthodoxy is a little different. It has, the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the big modern Orthodox rabbinic organization. It has, a committee that deals with clergy abuse and other improprieties related to that. So if a rabbi is alleged to have slept with a congregant or molested a child or whatever, and it's something where the police weren't called right away. Maybe they should have been, but they weren't. They're notified. The rabbi is usually suspended immediately. It's investigated. Police are contacted if a crime is involved, and they do a pretty decent job of it. They're very similar to what the Reform movement has, what the conservative movement has. Ultra-Orthodoxy has nothing like that. Now, these other movements aren't perfect, and their investigations aren't perfect, and the way they handle things are not perfect, but at least they're trying. And they're, as far as I can tell, they're as good as any other religious group, Jewish or not, functioning when it comes to this type of thing. They're as good as the best that's out there, as far as I know. Although, again, for all of these groups, it's still not what it should be. Ultra-Orthodoxy, however, has no function in this at all. And anytime they've tried to do something, even on an ad hoc level, it's failed. So.
Have you been called an anti-Semite?
Oh, thousands of times.
Discuss that, please.
What's to discuss? People call me an anti-Semite all the time. They call me a Nazi all the time. There's a guy that's been leaving comments lately comparing me to capos, who were the head of in the concentration camps and the death camps. There were Jews who cooperated with the Nazis in terms of running the camp, and they were often cruel people. They may not have been in real life, but by the time they got into Auschwitz or whatever happened to them, it happened. And anyway, and a lot of them did some very terrible things. Most of them ended up being killed like everybody else was. But, so I've been called a capo, just like a capo in Auschwitz. I don't know how much I would have loved to, throw fellow Jews into the ovens, whatever you can possibly imagine. And that's because they can't fight me on the arguments. They can't fight me on the facts. I mean, what I'm known for is not lying. What I'm known for is not writing my own stuff unless I have, my standard for what I publish is much higher than the average blog. It's higher than some newspapers have. And it's very difficult to if you have to deal with the facts, you're going to lose. If you're fighting me, if you're dealing with calling me names, well, I mean, how do I win that? I'm one person, and they're hundreds, thousands. So.
What about the argument that your website helps the anti-Semitic argument or something? I mean, surely you've heard that.
Oh yeah, all the time.
What about all that?
My answer to it is, first of all, the Jews, the ultra-Orthodox Jews that are committing the crimes are the people who are helping the anti-Semites. If you want to say that, I mean, look, every religious grouping has criminals, right? Doesn't matter where you go. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Buddhists. You can go to, you can go wherever you want to, any religious grouping, anywhere, and you're going to find criminals. So what happens? You're going to find pedophiles. You're going to find pedophiles anywhere you go where there are kids. Whether you're talking about people who are party clowns or you're talking about people who are teachers. That's the way it works, okay? So the idea that exposing this helps anti-Semites, well, I guess if you're not a very sophisticated person and you say, look, a Jew did this, so all Jews are bad, Yeah, I suppose that could help them on some level, but you know, if you don't want that to happen, you basically have two choices. One is to stop people who are criminals from continuing to commit crimes by dealing with them, you know, by going to the police, by having zero tolerance for people who are running massive frauds or people who are molesting children. Have zero tolerance for it. You know, but instead, you know, don't blame the people who are writing the stories about it. You know.
Do you believe you're attacking an ideology or just isolated incidences? Or what exactly is the target in your...
Yeah, it started out with just the incidents, and then after a while I realized that there was much more going on than just these incidents, and it's true. Because the cover-ups, especially the molestation, the cover-ups were things that there were actually meetings about. Are we going to go to the police about this person? You know, how are we going to handle this? There were actual rabbinic courts convened where they chose not to go to the police. It's not a situation where you can say it's just an isolated grouping here and an isolated grouping there. It's a pattern, and it's a pattern that runs deep, and it's a very foul pattern. It's very normal. It's the same thing the Catholic Church did. It's the same thing every other grouping I've ever heard of that's had a problem has done in the beginning, right? This is exactly what happens. But the way to combat that isn't to be quiet. The way to combat that is to make it public, whether it be through filing lawsuits or going to the police and getting people arrested, or writing newspaper or blog stories on it.
So you shine a light on a lot of nasty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there no public attention other than you on this kind of stuff?
I wouldn't say there isn't anything besides me. There is other stuff. The Jewish Week, which is a big Jewish newspaper based in New York, has done some coverage on it in the last 2 years or so. Some good coverage, very good coverage. There are other blogs besides me. There's some things.
In the Jewish community, correct? Is there anything broader in the mass media?
Talking about abuse of kids and that type of stuff?
Yeah, these scandals that you focus on.
And you're talking about specifically within the ultra-Orthodox community. Yeah, there's been the New York Magazine did a big piece in 2006 called On the Rabbi's Knee that dealt with one particular story of abuse and did it very well. There has been some coverage in the New York Post and the Daily News. There's a problem going beyond that, and that has to do with there are a couple of factors here. Generally, the way it works is that there's this fear of being called anti-Semitic, and while there is not a fear of being called anti-Catholic in most places, so the church caught. I'm going to catch a lot of hell for saying this. The church caught more than we would have caught if that had been our scandal 10, 15 years ago. And this fear of being labeled an anti-Semite, and it's not just some non-Jewish reporter or editor that's scared of this. It's this idea that if the New York Times is a good example of this, where there are a lot of Jews working there. They're known for having a policy in the way they cover Israel that the Jewish community, especially the Orthodox community in New York, doesn't like. They take a lot of heat for it. They have specific problems with Tom Friedman, who's originally from Minneapolis, by the way, where he's been going back into the 80s, where there's certain questions about his honesty in what he did when he was covering Israel. Anyway, so the Times has a terrible reputation with that, and they don't like to take shots for other things. So every time they have like a really negative story about ultra-Orthodox Jews, you can bet money there are going to be 7, 8, 9 positive stories that'll start popping up after that. Whether they had a meeting and made this decision or this is just reflexive, I don't know. But I do know that they've had every opportunity to cover these stories. You just had a man, Baruch Leibowitz, who is a rabbi and a cantor who spent most of his time actually as a travel agent in Brooklyn. His brother is a Hasidic Rebbe. was a very well-known figure in the Borough Park community of Brooklyn. He was just sentenced to 10 2/3 to 32 years for rape of minors. So that story got, I think, either no play or only a tiny little bit of play in the New York Times. But it was covered in the Post, it was covered in the Daily News, it's covered in Jewish papers. And the Times has been AWOL on this stuff. For every time they do a story, there are dozens when they don't. And I think that that's a very long way of saying if the Times doesn't do a piece, then it doesn't really permeate out, because it's New York and it's considered their turf. The Daily News and the Post are both tabloids, after all, you know. So
why aren't they doing the story then, in your view?
They're not doing it, I think, and I've heard this from people inside the Times, and I've heard this from people who have tried to deal with the Times, and I've seen it myself when I've contacted them for things, that they have a, Brooklyn is, other than the real estate section, Brooklyn is foreign territory to them. They don't have a good handle on it, they don't have reporters that know how to deal with it, and they just simply have this fear of being presented as anti-Semitic, of being viewed as anti-Semitic because of doing this. Because you think about it, look at the kind of response I get from some people for what I do. I'm not making things up. I just turned down yesterday someone who wants me to do a story on a guy who's molesting children, doing it for 30 years. He's you know, the guy says he molested me, molested my brother, he molested this guy, that guy molested his daughter, he's molesting this one. But they won't use their names, and I wouldn't do the story.
This is a rabbi at a criminal here? Or?
This is another cantor. But the point is, in the ultra-Orthodox community, the point is that I won't do stories like that until I have lots of confirmation. I work very hard. I mean, I'm not going to just put up something that's going to destroy somebody's life until I'm very sure and have, you know, real confirmation of it. But I'll do it. And I'll probably do this story because I'm going to get more confirmation in the next couple of days. And I'll probably get enough to do the story. And I'll probably do it. At which point, a whole nother group of people are going to call me an anti-Semite. Right? That comes with the territory. The death threats come with the territory. Those are mostly related to Postville, but I get them for everything. I get them for this stuff too. And I just don't think I think the Times, for whatever reason, just doesn't have the balls to do it. It's the only way I can put it. Which is sad, because they have the resources. Nobody else has the resources like they do. Times wanted to do a series on this. They could break the story wide open. I mean, it goes to the highest levels of rabbinic leadership in the ultra-Orthodox community. The cover-up does. But they won't do it. So
you seem to be suggesting that with the Catholic sex scandals all in the news everywhere, there's an equivalent in the Jewish Orthodox
Absolutely.
community?
Absolutely. It's not a direct parallel, but there's a very similar.
And so why doesn't it get the same splash then?
Exactly what I'm saying. It's based, it's a combination of things. It's based in Brooklyn and in a couple of other enclaves that are very heavily ultra-Orthodox. You do not have a lot of journalists who can penetrate those communities and who really can understand what's going on and cover them. The Catholic Church is a little easier to deal with. I mean, you have people who have been covering the church for many, many, many years. You have a lot of Catholics in the media, lapsed or otherwise. You don't, if you went to a Catholic school, and even if you only went through 8th grade, you know enough to have enough understanding with a couple hours reading to understand the hierarchy, to understand how things work. In ultra-Orthodox, when you're dealing with ultra-Orthodoxy, if you were never inside of it, chances are you're never really going to understand it. It's much harder, and then you're dealing with people who are communicating often in Yiddish. You have this Byzantine series of layers of control, where every time you go up to another layer, somebody says, "Oh, that's not my responsibility. That's his responsibility." and you keep being moved sideways, downwards, this way, that way. And unless you know how to break through this, you never get to the... So it's a hard story to cover, combined with the fact that you've got these people with black coats and black hats and long beards who have the stereotypical but incorrect image of what Jews looked like right before the Holocaust. Jews right before the Holocaust looked like pretty much like the average non-Orthodox Jew looks today. Most Jews weren't Orthodox. And the ones that were didn't look so much like the Hasidim that you see and other things. They weren't, they were not the dominant, except for parts of Poland, they weren't the dominant grouping. But people don't realize that. It's the fiddler on the roof problem. Everybody thinks, when you think, what did Jews, what was Judaism historically? It's if I were a rich man. It's Tevye. It's that story. It's that look. It's the vest and the beard and the puffy white shirt and the cap and the whole thing. So suddenly you're faced with a group of guys who might be covering up, a sex abuse story for 25 years or whatever, and who you going to be writing about? It's Tevye. What do? You have that. That's really what the problem is. And the sad thing, the ironic thing is that if you actually read the original story, Tevye the Milkman, as it was written, you'll see that it was a very dark story, as were all the other stories that the author wrote. And they were cheered up, just as it was cheered up for the movie. A lot of them were even cheered up for publication because they were considered too dark and too anti-Semitic.
The original?
The original stories, sure. It was portraying the old shtetl life in a too negative way, because interestingly, a lot of the Yiddishists, the secular Yiddish intelligentsia that was active in the 1920s, a little bit earlier, a little bit later, all came from religious families primarily. So, Tevye the Milkman was exposing these people's grandparents, these people's parents, and they didn't like it. They didn't disagree necessarily with the facts, but they thought the presentation was too out of context. It was the same thing that people say to me.
Well, what was so anti-Semitic about the original text?
It wasn't that it was really anti-Semitic, it was that it portrayed the shtetl as it really was, which was a poor, often closed, backward place where people really wanted to get the hell out. They weren't interested in, most people didn't want to live in the little shtetl, especially they didn't want to live there.
So Fiddler on the Roof is complete myth?
It's not complete myth, they just jazzed it up, made a nice musical out of it.
Okay, you've already talked about this next thing, but I want to bang on it a little more.
Mm-hmm.
The issue about your website, which is to say, there are going to be, a lot of people are going to be accusing you of all kinds of things because you only have negative. And so
mostly.
What's wrong with you?
Mostly negative, not all
Yeah,
negative.
so, well, you've already talked about it to some degree, but this is important enough that I'd like to
Mm-hmm.
elaborate some more, please. About you're getting all these people who accuse you of what's wrong with you. You can't. That's not fair. It's not just to just have this litany of negative things.
Well, part of it is how a blog works. If you look at how the page looks now and how it's looked for many years, you have two fixed columns, right, which stay basically the same. Might swap out one ad or something every once in a while, but it's the same thing. And you have the bigger column, which is where you're putting your posts up. And the newest post is on the top, the oldest post is on the bottom, and every time you add a post, it moves down. And you only have so many posts on that front page. And you can't have that many because the page has to load. And you still have to take into account people that are using dial-up modems and people that have very slow internet connections. And and you have to think about people who are using, netbooks with small screens and everything. So you can't just keep running, these huge pages. So you can have maybe, when we're talking about having a headline and a subhead and the rest of the story continues by clicking onto a separate page, so you can have maybe 10 posts, 12 posts on a page, depending. That's about the most you can do. So when you think about that and you realize how much bad news there really is out there, there isn't really a lot of room. So that's really that was a primary concern for a very long time, and it still is today. I go and I look and I start saying, what's out there? What do I want to put up there? What am I going to report myself? What's going on? And I mean, the Rubashkin story alone, the agriprocessor story alone, during the busy times, you could have 10, 15 stories a day. How in the world would is there space for me to put in here's a woman with a bake sale or something? It has to be something extraordinarily good to get in. On the other hand, I don't pretend to be representative in the sense that I'm going to report all the good and all the bad, or I'm going to try to break it down into some kind of percentages and do that, or I don't pretend I'm doing that, and I don't have a good way of doing it.
General question, is Chabad racist? And the quality, there's a lot of issues to that, but one, I ran across an article on your website, maybe this, I don't recall if this was Chabad, but that there was Ashkenazi and Sephardi women or something were segregated.
That's not them. That's not them. Chabad is racist, but not that way.
Okay, will you discuss that, please?
Okay. If you are leaving Ethiopian Jews out of the equation for a moment, and the very dark-skinned Indian Jews, B'nai Israel, leaving those two groups out for a moment. If you are Sephardic, if you are Ashkenazi, it doesn't matter to Chabad. Their schools are mixed, everything is mixed, except you won't find, in general, you won't find people from the inner core Chabad families marrying Sephardim or anything that's outside. They won't marry Bali Tshuva, people who, generally, I mean, people who became religious later in life, they won't marry them. So they have issues of that. But when it comes to who goes into the schools, how people are treated, if you can be a rabbi for Chabad, if your family is from Morocco or your family is from Chicago, it doesn't really matter to them, okay? That's very good. The flip side of this that's bad is that if you're an Ethiopian Jew, you have a much harder time being integrated in Chabad. They wouldn't let him in schools for a very long time. The head of Chabad schools in Israel, who is no longer alive, unfortunately, but who I knew I worked for his brother-in-law, he said very clearly that the Rebbe told him not to take any. And he had an offer of $1 million from a rich man to take one Ethiopian Jew, I'll give you $1 million. So I said through his brother-in-law, I'll get you an Ethiopian Jew that has a good conversion. So you don't have to worry. I'll have them tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, All you got to do is enroll him, and then you take 51%, and your brother-in-law and I are going to take 49%, and we're going to use it for projects in Jerusalem where I worked. And he wouldn't do it. He didn't care, pedigree or not. So there is that. And in terms of when you're dealing with non-Jews, there is a level of racism there. Chabad views non-Jews as being a lesser type of creation than Jews are, even though they have outreach to non-Jews, and they talk about various laws that non-Jews need to follow and how they can reach God that way and a whole list of things. They do also have this other problem, which is sort of unique to them and to a couple other small subgroups within ultra-Orthodoxy, where non-Jews are viewed as being, that their souls come from a place that's not as good as where Jewish souls come from. Look at it that way. That's actually a polite way of saying what they actually have written in the book called the Tanya, which is written by the first Rebbe of Chabad, the first rabbinic leader of Chabad in the late 1700s. So there's that. And then you have Crown Heights, which is, for years was located in the middle of a ghetto and in Brooklyn. And you had the Crown Heights riots where, you had, which was really more of a pogrom than it was a riot. And you had, Jews being attacked just because they were Jews. There was a lot of violence, a lot of anti-Semitism, and not to say that there wasn't a significant amount of we don't like you because you're black behavior before that from Chabad people there. But in truth, having been there and seen it, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. So people who grew up in that and grew up used to that. It's a little different now. Things have gentrified a little bit more. The surrounding black community, I think, has come to deal with, in some ways, are dealing better with Chabad, and Chabad's dealing better with them. And so you have less of this. But when you're talking about people that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, and spend any significant time in Crown Heights, you have, for a lot of them, a strong undertone of racism, which I'm not excusing, but I understand where it comes from. A lot of these people weren't born and looked at someone black and said he's inferior, he's bad, he's whatever. It's because, you know, if you take people and you dump them, you know, if you took a group of naive white people and dumped them in Watts, chances are you're going to have a significant number of them that are not going to like, you know, especially if you dump them in the right part of Watts, who are not going to like black people very much, even though if you dump them in, I can't think of the names of neighborhoods, but there are a lot of other places you could dump them that are primarily black, and you wouldn't have that reaction at all, right? So my contention, is a long way of saying it, is it isn't necessarily because of the skin color, although that's how they view it. It's because of the behavior of the population when it was heavily ghettoized. Yeah.
What's the Chabad policy on converts to Judaism, and particularly, is there a hierarchy? I mean,
converts are screwed, pretty much. I mean, yes, they take converts, a lot of them. Yes, the doors are open. Yes, you're just the same as everybody else. You just like a Baal Tshuva, or like someone who comes into Chabad later, you know, from another rabbinic grouping or whatever. You're not going to marry into the inner core families generally. You're not going to have first access, or even second, or sometimes even third access to the resources and the jobs and whatever. You're always going to be excluded in some way, even though it's never going to be open. You're never going to have a situation where they're going to say, you know, we don't let Jim do this because he's a convert. They're not going to say that. It's just that, you know, they're always going to hire their kids first. They're always going to hire their cousins first. They're always going to hire their relatives first, or their best friends' kids first. And way down that list is the guy that has no relatives or best friends.
To what degree does this born of a Jewish mother play into this? Is that critical or not?
In what sense? I didn't.
Traditionally a Jew.
Yes. No. You have to. Yes. So if someone's born of a Jewish mother, they're Jewish. If someone is born of a non-Jewish mother, they're not. That's the Orthodox understanding and conservative understanding of how that works. And therefore, if you are born of a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, you're not Jewish, and you would have to convert. Flip side, you're born of a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father, you don't have to convert. Right? So that's the same as in any other part of Orthodoxy.
But do you lose any ground just by that you're not born of a Jewish mother? And if you're a convert, if your mother's not Jewish, do you have full access to everything in Chabad?
Well, no, it's the same. Any convert is going. You have full access to everything except the resources. Okay, and there's no sign up that says converts not welcome. There's no sign up that says they're much nicer to converts than other parts of Orthodoxy in some ways. It's just that, having seen this from the inside, it's almost always somebody's brother-in-law, somebody's cousin, somebody's kid, somebody's nephew, somebody's best friend's kid who gets the job, and it's almost never the convert, the Baal Tshuva, the newcomer. Okay, and part of that's understandable, even if it's wrong, but that's what it is, and it's not helped Chabad, it's hurt Chabad.
Can you give me some, what's the difference between ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox? Where are the central?
I'll answer in a second. I just want to go back to say one other thing. There are several families that are black that are Chabad. And I don't know, actually, I won't say the names now. I can think of two offhand that I knew years ago, and I think there are several more. And I cannot think of one of their kids, even though they grew up Chabad. And I think in one case the family was Jewish for many generations. I can't think of one case where the kid is functioning as a Chabad rabbi anywhere in a position of authority.
About marriage?
they get married.
To-
I know. Well, yeah, there's a really nice guy who's from one of those families, who's married to a girl from a family here, or at least was. I don't know. I haven't seen them in 7 years 6 years since I got kicked out. But there isn't when talking about not getting involved, getting the resources, and this again, I have to find a nice way to say this, but the particular family married into wouldn't be a family that would be like high up on the list of this is a good family to marry into. Not that there's anything specifically wrong with the individuals, just for various reasons, in the social pecking order, they'd be right down at the bottom. And I'm talking about the non-black family. And that's who the kid married into. The girl's actually a very sweet, nice person, and he got he's very lucky in that sense. But in terms of what the process was, in terms of what people, I'm sure, were thinking as they were making the arrangements, it was, well, we got to eliminate this group and this families and this, and what are we left with? And it's like, well, we got this family, well, let's see, the brother's a drug addict and the uncle is a whatever and whatever. Oh, and this one, well, they've got this wrong there and that's wrong, and the father's this and this one's that. And they finally, whatever. Oh, this is the nicest of what we got. We'll give, and that's basically unfortunately, how that seems to work. Yeah. So what was the question I interrupted? Okay. Works two ways. Ultra-Orthodoxy isn't, first of all, neither are classic. That would be a wrong way to look at it. There was really no Orthodoxy before about 1750 maybe. No. There was just Judaism. There was Rabbinic Judaism and various splinter groups. You had, a splinter group from Rabbinic Judaism is Christianity. Another splinter group would be the Karaites. You had various other smaller factions that split off. At one point, the Karaites were probably 40 or 50% of world Jewry in the 700s, 800s. The understanding that the Talmud's word is final is really a club to beat the Karaites with more than it is anything else. Than it is any reflection of reality at the time the Talmud was finalized. So anyway, ultra-Orthodoxy is a reaction to modernity, just as modern Orthodoxy is a reaction to modernity. Ultra-Orthodoxy chose to regress. It chose to build higher ghetto walls, so to speak. It actually, they weren't ghettos already. They tried to go back into a ghetto, tried to freeze time so that there's a saying from one of the earliest people associated with ultra-Orthodoxy, the Chatam Sofer, who was a big rabbi about late 1700s. And it was in the, I forget, actually I'm blanking on the exact phraseology of it, but you're not allowed to eat chadash, which is new grain. And there's a commandment against, and you have to wait a certain amount of time before you can eat it. So, and so I forget how that sentence runs, Ein Chadash B'Torah or whatever. So you can read it as it's supposed to be read if you read it in its context, or you can pull it out and make a witty little saying out of it. And he said Ein Chadash B'Torah, that there's nothing new in the Torah, meaning you have to reject anything new, right? So that's what they do. So anything new that's ever come along, they've rejected, even if it made perfect sense. And you see that with electricity as an example of things. When early on in the debate whether electricity could be used on the Sabbath or not, whether it constituted fire or constituted any of the other things that Jews are not supposed to do, you see ultra-Orthodox rabbis constructing ways not to allow the use of electricity, even though the ways they constructed are ridiculous even for the knowledge they had, because they didn't want to allow it because it was new. Right? So that's what they are. Modern Orthodoxy, which is a little bit later in coming, is a idea that we're going to embrace the best of modernity without giving up the core values, the Jewish law, and whatever of Orthodoxy. That we're going to live in both worlds. We'll go to the opera, but we're going to study Talmud. It used to be very common in Germany. We're going to go, that's where it started. We're going to go to the opera, but we're still going to study Talmud every day, and we're still going to do all this we'll be at the symphony, but we're going to, you know, we're going to have our Talmuds, and we're going to be studying every day, and we're going to keep kosher, and we're going to do all of this. So those are the two basic, I mean, in a cartoonish form, those are the two basic parts of Orthodoxy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's an article, it'll take a long time to look at all your articles, there's so much there. But there's an article on your website about Orthodox Jews in Israel regularly spitting on Christian priests and Jews. And what's this about? And
Sorry.
Is this an isolated attitude?
No,
Is
no,
it
no,
common
no.
amongst Haredim? And I've heard stories that some spit by a church, and I saw a Chabad guy did that, and I started getting, is that what that's about, or am I, what can you tell me?
It has to do with the rejection of idol worship. So because Christianity is considered to be idol worship, especially Eastern Christianity, by ultra-Orthodoxy, even though if you actually look into the decisions of, you know, the decisions within the responsa literature in Jewish law about it, some people say yes, some people say no, right? So there are a lot of different ways it can be interpreted. The problem has to do with the Trinity, right, and how that's viewed. So ultra-Orthodoxy tends to turn everything into a cartoon. So for them, if this could be, if this is idol worship, then you have to reject it. Well, you have to reject it, you have to spit on it, right? So there's that kind of an attitude. That's shifted over to incorporate some of what used to be called modern Orthodoxy and is now really called in Israel the national religious movement. And so the right wing of that kind of is picked up a lot of this stuff, especially the kids. So what you see, especially kids from the settlements, I should say. So what you see is in Jerusalem, which, you know, the old city, which is viewed by Jews as Jewish territory, but in reality has a majority of non-Jews by far, because you have the Christian quarter, the Arab quarter, the Armenian quarter, Muslim quarter, which is the Arab quarter, but you have, you know, and those are full of, you know, people who, hey, you know, are not Jewish. And I lived there in the Jewish quarter for a couple of years, not all in one stretch, but for about a couple of years, a little bit more actually. And so I saw a lot of this stuff. And once I carried some bags for an Armenian woman up the hill from the base of not the base of the Jewish quarter, but the middle of the Jewish quarter up to the beginning of the Armenian quarter to her house, all the way up the stairs and up the stairs into her house. She lived right on the border between the Armenian quarter and the Jewish quarter. And the look on the faces of the Armenians when I came up with those groceries, and here's a Jewish yeshiva student. I had a big red beard then, and which has since gone darker and grayer, and I had a black hat on, and I was wearing a suit or whatever, and here I am carrying like these 5 heavy bags. She was trying to drag up the thing, and I'd carry them up the stairs, and look on the people's faces, they couldn't believe it. They didn't like me. They didn't like me any better than, you know, a lot of the Jews would have liked them. But you saw the looks on their faces of just shock that somebody would help this. Why would you help us? We hate you. You hate us. Why are you helping this woman? You know, and these were Armenian Christians. It was just, there was no cross-pollination at all, except for a couple of, you know, like grocery stores or stuff where people would meet and you talk while you're shopping or something. And, you know, there was a nice, in the 80s, it was already gone by the 90s, the second time I was there, but there was a nice little grocery store right at that border. It was owned by an Armenian family where the girls had gone to college in America, and they were very sweet. But there was no real cross-pollination. And so why do people spit on priests? Because they see the cross, they see the long black coats and the black Eastern Orthodox caps and all of the ponytails and sometimes walking with the incense even for certain things and religious ceremonies. And they see this and they react the same way a lot of non-Jews used to react to Jews walking around with beards and black hats, and, you know, it's the same thing. Driven for slightly different reasons, you know, theologically, but, you know, they saw Christ killers, we see idolaters, and people who egged on or participated in pogroms against Jews, right? But that's why it happens.
Do you have any examples of moral outrages you ever heard about as a Chabad member? Anything that really outraged you morally? The Ethiopian issue.
I mean, while I was
anything you've
Chabad,
heard,
or
the tenets that started to bother you?
what bothered me about Chabad?
Yeah.
Oh, a lot of things bothered me. The obsessive nature of Rebbe worship, of the Rebbe being the perfect human being, of everything having to go through him, of Chabad being the best and the most perfect of all Judaisms, and everything else being subservient to that, and not, those types of things bothered me tremendously. The reaction to Ethiopian Jews, the reaction to anything that wasn't them. If you did something that was great, but it wasn't done under their banner, it's like it didn't exist, or it was somehow not as good as what they are. That type of stuff. There was very little, for the most part, with some exceptions, there was a very little, I mean, if a competitor did a great program, got a lot of non-observant Jews to come to a program, did a really good job with it. The Chabadniks I knew didn't look at that and say, boy, they really did a good job with it. That's a great thing. I'm glad they did that. What can we learn from this? And maybe we can adapt it and do something with it for ourselves. It was all about how rotten these bastards are. That was basically that stuff is what bothered me.
I guess we can segue to Postville.
Yeah, we should.
Could you synopsize? I know it's a giant thing, but could you talking heads? This is funnel it down. What happened in Postville?
What happened in Postville is a group of Chabad Hasidic Jews bought an old closed slaughterhouse and decided that this was going to be the center for kosher meat production in North America. And they set out to make that happen. But they did it in ways that weren't always legal and weren't always nice. And they created a large amount of animosity within the local community, within the surrounding communities, with their suppliers, with people who were concerned about how the animals were being treated, to whatever you can imagine. Their own employees. They created a tremendous amount of animosity. At the same time, you had a lot of people, relative to the size, living in Postville who had never seen anything like this before. And very much like we were talking about people spitting on Armenian priests or whatever, they saw black hats and black coats and these unkept beards and Brooklyn accents, and they said, what the hell is this? This is not, this is not America. This is not American. This is not, this is not what we are. So there was that tension going on from day one. And unfortunately, the Rubashkin family that owned the plant cut a lot of corners in production, in animal handling, and then when they got caught, first by PETA, the animal rights group, caught them with inhumane slaughter, and the filming was done in 2004, but they knew about it first in 2003 and tried to get it changed politely. And the Rubashkin family basically spit on them. They had their Nathan Lewin, their attorney, just batter them to the, insult them and call them names and be disgusting. And all PETA wanted to do was, clean up. They didn't want them to stop slaughtering. They didn't want them to change how Jewish slaughter is done. They just wanted them not to do the bad animal handling things that the USDA later told them to stop doing. So that's how it started. And at the same time as that was like the first crack. Then came an expose done by the Forward, which was a big Jewish newspaper in New York, because the Rubashkin family was abusing the workers. They had two different payrolls. They were paying the immigrant workers, the undocumented immigrant workers, much less than they were paying for the most part, the quote-unquote American workers. They were stealing overtime. They were making people having them work forced overtime and then, not paying them for it. You had kids working 12 to 14-hour days, 6 days a week when they were supposed to be in school. 7 a.m. to sometimes 10 p.m. Yeah. Anyway, and so it was a situation, a disaster waiting to happen. And the way the Rubashkins handled this as things were revealed, whether it was what the forward did, what PETA did, what I did, because I exposed a lot when PETA didn't, know the intricacies of slaughter, and I did, kosher slaughter, and I'd worked in it a little bit. And the first time when I saw those videotapes, I was actually working with a guy that broke the story. The Times was supposed to break it, but they held it for an extra day after they said they were publishing and had done all the fact checking because they were nervous. Not because the facts were wrong, because it was the Times. They need another day to make sure they wanted to find some stronger pro-Orthodox quotes from, or something, in typical Times fashion. So the New York Sun, which no longer exists, but the New York Sun broke the story. A friend of mine is the reporter for the Sun that broke the story. He called me up and he said, this is happening. I'm trying to write a piece for the Sun. I'm trying to get it out for tomorrow morning. He was calling me on a Sunday at like 7 o'clock at night. I'm at the convention of Agudas Israel of America, which was the big umbrella ultra-Orthodox organization, and they're screaming from the podium about PETA attacking the Jews and anti-Semitism and attacking Jewish slaughter, and I need your help. And I helped him for the first 3 days of this, until I finally got a chance to see the videotapes. I didn't know they were online, and I kept asking when he was going to send them to me. He said, why don't you look online? After like day 3, he said, haven't you looked online? I told, they're online. Didn't I tell you? I said, no. So I looked, and I called him up, and I said, I can't do this. And I explained to him what was wrong with it. And I started doing my own reporting. I started calling up rabbis and interviewing them, and I got, well, I'd like to talk off the record, and I would say no, and they'd say please, and I'd say, oh, are you a rabbi? Okay, but you got to give me some stuff on the record. Fine. And they would go off the record and tell me how horrible it was, and how the Rubashkin family would listen to them, was doing whatever they wanted to, and how I told them not to do this or I told them not to do that, but they wouldn't listen. But you can't print any of that. Over and over and over again. It was that kind of stuff. So I quickly understood that there was a major problem there. That it wasn't just that the slaughter was bad, it was that the whole way the operation was run was bad. And so I did a lot of reporting on it, and exposing everything from what was wrong with the slaughter to things with how the workers were treated that the forward didn't have access to or whatever. And so this is a long, it was supposed to be shorter, and I'm sorry to encapsulate it, but this is what happened, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. At one point in 2007, Rubashkin's, one of his supervising rabbis, who actually lives here, and is the guy that threw me out of Chabad, Asher Zeilengold, he and a couple of his friends fabricated a fake OSHA report. They got a guy who used to be, or maybe currently was, an OSHA inspector, just didn't work in that territory. Got him to go into the plant and do a private consult. It's completely illegal. And then they tried to release it as an OSHA report clearing the plant. And of course, I exposed that. And then OSHA tried to find out who the guy was. And these people freaked out that they got caught. But Rubashkin tried to use that, and he knew it was faked. He clearly knew it was fake. And they did this kind of stuff. And it's just, you can't, they showed a complete and total disregard for American law over and over and over again. They had letter after letter after letter from Social Security Administration saying that their Social Security numbers for the employees didn't match. Over and over and over again. They had all these things. They didn't take care of it. And then suddenly there were rumors of a raid in 2008. And that's when they started trying to get the fake documentation. That's when Shalom Rubashkin claims he wanted to fire 200 undocumented workers. He had almost 800 undocumented workers. 75% of his workforce was illegal, probably actually more. The ones that they arrested just under 400, the feds did in that raid. But there were double that, approximately double that. The night shift wasn't there. It's when they came. If they had timed the raid a little bit better, they would have gotten a huge number more.
And the Chabad's claimed anti-Semitism in the beginning of all this? With all these
Always.
crimes? Could you
Always.
discuss that?
Always. It's not just Chabad. It was their attorney Nathan Lewin, who is an ultra-Orthodox Jew, connected to a Agudath Israel of America, that umbrella organization. He is close to Chabad, but he is not a member of Chabad. That was his approach from day one. That this is all anti-Semitism. He said PETA was, were nothing. They were Nazis. He literally said that. I actually called him up. He was on a radio show in New York in 2004. I challenged him for any evidence, and he didn't have any. But he was calling them Nazis. He was, you can't get more bizarre than how they handle this, and how they're handling it today. They're still doing it.
When I went to this Lag BaOmer parade 2 days ago, Sunday,
Right.
I was blown away. That man was just convicted, right? Leading their parade was this big poster of the guy. What on earth? Why are they? What's going on? I was
Because
flabbergasted.
they view everything as being illegitimate. They view the convictions as illegitimate. They view the charges as illegitimate. They say everybody does this. You picked on us because we're Jewish. You picked on us because we have black hats and beards. You wouldn't do it if you didn't do it to Swift. You only did it to us. The fact that Rubashkin, you realize that Rubashkin, it's not just that he committed bank fraud or wire fraud or whatever, which was that he faxed, false information, which is wire fraud. It's not just that. The man lied to the feds. The man obstructed justice. He destroyed evidence. He bribed the mayor of Postville. There are dozens and dozens. You have aggravated identity theft. You have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of crimes that this man is alleged to have committed, besides the ones he was charged with. And then you have the ones he was charged with and the ones he was convicted of. It's not a case of, it's simple bank fraud and this guy got a year and a day 5 years ago, and now you're going to give him 25 years. Well, no, that's not exactly how it worked. You see, that guy that got a year and a day or whatever it was, or 2 years or 3 years, he got that before sentencing got tougher. He pled guilty. He cooperated with the federal investigators. He made restitution. He said he was sorry. He admitted his guilt. He said he defrauded people. He didn't make excuses. You, Shalom Rubashkin, blamed it on everybody else you could blame it on. Wouldn't cooperate with the investigation. Hid your assets. Continue to hide your assets. Called everybody an anti-Semite through your spokespeople. Did all these other crimes. He did crimes when he was on bail, for God's sakes. What kind of deal do you think he's going to get? So, but these are nuances for some reason to Chabad and to the ultra-Orthodox community. The idea that somebody who cooperates, who has been caught red-handed, has got no chance of being found innocent, has committed a crime. You might argue over how long the sentence should be. You might argue over how many counts there really are. But the man committed the crimes. Whether there are 86 of them, which he was convicted on, or whether there are only 7 or 8 counts, right? He still committed those crimes. And he showed no remorse, accepted no guilt, and made no apology of any merit until sentencing. And even then, he made a rather amorphous apology to my community and especially to my family. What does my community mean? Unfortunately, I wasn't in the courtroom. But, if that's really all he said, and I've not heard any different, and I posted that I hoped he'd said more, and no one rushed in to say, sure, he said all these other things, and I'm not seeing it reported anymore. My community is more likely to mean his Jewish community, especially his Chabad and ultra-Orthodox community, than it is to mean, some guy named Christian that lives around the corner from him. Right?
You mentioned the mayor of Postville was bribed?
Yes.
Did you discuss that? I didn't know about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, there have been years of rumors about this type of corruption with this mayor, with the mayor before, who's now mayor again. that he was bribed, the police, the fire department, all these different inspectors being bribed, getting boxes of meat delivered to their house, getting cash, getting stuff. This has been going on for years, that this, I've been told about it for years. I know other people have been told, and people say, I saw it, I'll sign an affidavit if you want, that this happened. But in the sentencing memorandum from the government, and the one from Sholem Rubashkin, the incident with the mayor is mentioned. Rubashkin presents it as extortion from the mayor to get money out of him.
Which guy is this? Which is the
Penrod,
What is his name?
Robert Penrod. That Penrod extorted him. And the government's basic response to this is Rubashkin's going to tell you that this was extortion, but he never came forward and presented this to us when we could have done something about it. Of course, you have a public official extorting somebody. They would have jumped at that in a second. That would have reduced Rubashkin's sentence. That would have helped Rubashkin, and they would have loved to put the mayor away. Why not give him that information?
So essentially, Chabad bought the town. What do you know about the political structure there? 'Cause
Rubashkin bought the town. You can't blame that on Chabad, although they would have done it if they could have. But no, Rubashkin did that. But you go back to the early '90s when you had the incident where Pinchas Lou, who I know, and his brother Mendy, who I knew better and was my friend. His aunt is the wife of the Chabad rabbi here, but he grew up in England where his father is a big Chabad rabbi. Anyway, he went to Postville to work as a kosher supervisor for a while. He was a little directionless, wasn't sure what he wanted to do, and he and a guy named Stillman, who grew up in Crown Heights and who was a very wild guy, and they decided to go out on a Friday night, drive around, drink beer. Remember, Orthodox Jews don't drive cars on Friday nights, and they don't ride in cars on Friday nights. Go out, drink beer, and knock off a couple of convenience stores. And so they went into a convenience store, and so Lou was driving, so he sat behind the wheel, and Stillman went in, pulled out a gun, and told a grandmother who was working behind the counter that he wanted all her money, and she thought it was a joke. It's Iowa, it's a small town in Iowa. It was this guy with a Brooklyn accent. She thought it was a joke, and she said, "You're kidding, right?" And he said, "No, give me all your money." And so she opened the register, I think, and then he shot her. She still has a bullet in her. No one ever apologized to her. I talked to her about a year and a half ago. About a year ago. She told me, to this day, no one had ever apologized. No one from the plant. These guys both worked at the plant. They didn't even, she couldn't work. She was, critically ill for a little while, went in the hospital. She had a really bad time with it. Sholem Rubashkin and his guys, they didn't call her up and say, "Look, we're not, judging whether our guy shot you or not or whatever. We can't do that." But it's a terrible thing, and it's clearly associated with us. And, we feel terrible about it. And, and here's, how big is your freezer? And we're going to, at the very least, you're going to eat during this. And just send her, cost them next to nothing. Go deliver a couple 100 pounds worth of steaks or ground beef or something, right? Help the woman out. Nothing. Never an apology, nothing. Not from the guy that shot her, not from Lou who drove the car, not from the plant.
What was the politics of that? That was.
They bought, but what happened was that Stillman was a kid that was adopted and converted as an infant, and he didn't have a connected family. So and he was the guy who pulled the trigger. So Chabad, one of the rabbis from here, the husband of Pinchas Lou's aunt, and another rabbi, I believe, was Rabbi Grossbaum from here. Went down to Postville, or actually it wasn't Postville, it was where the jail he was held in. I forgot which, it was Walk-On or where they had him. But went into the jail to meet with him, and speaking to him in a mixture of Yiddish and English, offered him a motorcycle and money when he got out, and a job, and money while he was inside, if he would agree to minimize Lou's role and do everything possible to free Lou. And so, knowing he was going to go away, because he was clearly identified, I think there was a security camera too and whatever, so he was going to go away. So he agreed to do it, as long as he got the motorcycle and all this stuff. They did the deal. A guard overheard it and understood some of it, but not all of it, told Stephen Bloom, who wrote the book Postville, about it, and then Stillman, the guy that pulled the trigger, talked about it He said, well, what else, it's a good deal for me. I'm spending money in jail that I wouldn't have otherwise, and I'll be taken care of when I get out. I mean, when you get out of jail, who has a place to live? Who has a car or a transportation? I'll be taken care of. I'm doing it. And that's why I did it. So they did this. They bribed Stillman to do this, to get Lou out. And then they brought in a lot of special witnesses to testify for Lou, and they filled the courtroom with all these studious-looking rabbis praying for Lou, and talked about how good he was, and he just had a bad day, and then they got him released into a program that didn't exist at the Rabbinical College of America that they run in Morristown, New Jersey. They claimed the Aleph Institute, which is their prisoner outreach arm, Chabad's prisoner outreach arm, based in Miami Beach, Florida, actually in Surfside, Florida, claimed that there was a prisoner release program at this institution in Morristown, New Jersey, at their Central Rabbinic College there. And they got Lou released to that rather than serving any more jail time. And of course, there was no such program. He just had to go to class.
How did they get away with this? I mean, is it a factor of all the rabbis coming in there and the presumptions of the court?
They bought the best attorneys. They bribed whoever they could bribe. They had plenty of money to throw around. And they got him out. And then he married. He actually got engaged during this process. He married to a girl from a wealthy family in Crown Heights. He became a Lubavitch rabbi in, I believe, North Carolina. He was later accused of exposing himself to his cleaning lady. It's unclear what really happened with that. I don't know the details. I didn't really research the story, but Chabad didn't back him for that, and he's no longer working for Chabad.
A little side angle here. I've spoken with a few people in Postville, and this is in Bloom's book too. The stuff that comes up a lot, small in comparison to what you're talking about, but Chabad people are unfriendly, they don't mow their lawns, all these things.
Okay, they don't mow your lawns, that's a very common thing. The unfriendly ones generally are not the Chabad guys, unless they're from Israel. The unfriendly ones are normally the other ultra-Orthodox Jews that are there, because it's not just Chabad that's there. You have ultra-Orthodox Jews from various different ultra-Orthodox communities, because the slaughterers come from various communities. And based on religious reasons that make no real sense but exist. So they do that. And they tend to be completely alienated from people who aren't Jewish. So, unless they're forced to deal with them. Often they can't speak English. So they tend to, you get that, you had a black hat, an unkept beard, and a long black coat, and funny socks. And then add a small touch of arrogance, and you can look pretty bad. You can come off pretty bad. Yeah.
What thoughts do you have that in an American society that preaches tolerance, diversity, all that stuff, Chabad seems to be practicing the exact opposite, right?
Well, it is and it isn't. On one hand, it's very diverse. On one hand, it's very tolerant. You go to any Chabad house around the country, and you go to any Sabbath meal there, and you're going to find people that are not observant at all. They're Jewish, but they have no knowledge of what's going on at all. They've never seen a challah, a Sabbath loaf of bread before. They've never seen anyone or make kiddush before. They don't know what's going on. They've not the basic levels of Judaism they know nothing about. Yet they're there, and very scholarly people are there, and it's all kind of mixed up. So in that sense, they're very tolerant. And you can go to college campuses where you go to these dinners, and half of the people there are not Jewish. The boyfriends and girlfriends of the people who are coming. Because the idea is, okay, we want to break it up, but if we just try to break it up, then you'll lose the Jewish kid. So you let them come, you let them hang around, and hopefully the Jewish kid gets more involved, and on their own they're going to ditch the non-Jewish boyfriend or non-Jewish girlfriend, right? And if that doesn't happen, so we can either try a little bit ourselves, or maybe we can get the non-Jewish partner to convert, right? So you go to these places, and that's what it is. So it looks more tolerant than it is in some ways, and it is more tolerant than people think it is in others. But You can't find any religious community that has any strictures in it, any laws, where you're going to find, if I walk into a Catholic church and want to take communion, and I'm not Catholic, they're not going to hand me the wafer, if they know. I actually know this firsthand because I tried it when I was 10 with some neighbors. And it was kind of a funny thing. And the father was like 5, 6 people behind me in line, and as the priest was doing, and I forget how it was a little kid. I don't remember if he handed it to you or if it was on a plate or exactly how it was done. So I just remember starting to lean forward like all the kids had done in front of me, and the priest doing whatever he was doing with a little communion wafer, and then hearing from behind me, "No!" and this long arm reaching forward, and Mr. Hanich kind of yanking me out of line, which was like great for me as a Jew because I shouldn't take communion. I didn't care. I was hungry. I wanted to see what it looked like, a little matzah. I wanted to taste it, right? So, so for me, it wasn't a religious thing. It was just, it was cool. I wanted to see what the architecture was like, whatever. And for him, it was like, oh my God, the kid's going to take communion. We can't let that happen. He's not,
This guy knew who you were? That you were not a Catholic?
I was one of his son's friends. There's a lot, yeah. So, but obviously they wouldn't put some kind of mark on you if you show up in church, but they're not going to give you communion. They're not going to do certain things. That's true in any religious community. So Chabad shouldn't take a bad rap for the strictures that come with basic religion. What it should take a bad rap for is misrepresenting itself as being kind and open and diverse in ways when it truly, really is not.
Could you discuss this, Lisa? I talked with Jeff Abbas, and he told me one of the most memorable experiences he had in town with Chabad in Postville. He said he was sitting in a park, and I saw some garbage, and he went over and he picked up the garbage and put it away in the trash can, and some little Chabad kid came up to him and said, "Yeah, you people are supposed to do that. We don't do that."
You saw that happen, or he told you about it?
No, Jeff told me about
Yeah.
it. What's
Oh, I
that
wish we had
about?
the film. It's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the lack of tolerance. That's the lack of diversity. That's the non-Jews are not as good as us, that they have souls that come from a place that's not pure, that they're rooted in a lower creation almost. If you were going to look at the old evolution, except that you wouldn't view it as evolution because they don't believe in evolution. But if you were ranking, human beings and creation, right? So you would have Jews, this is them. Jews are on top, right? Then you've got non-Jews, then you have the great apes, then you have, right? And it goes down like this to rocks, right? So that's basically what it is. You can think of it another way is what I was saying is that famous drawing of the thing crawling out of the water, morphing into whatever, morphing into the ape, morphing into the prehistoric man, morphing into the human being, right? So it's the same thing except there's an extra layer added in, and that's non-Jews, right before the Jews, right?
But you were part of Chabad. At one point in time, you believed this stuff?
Believed it? Well, yes and no. You can believe these things and not believe them at the same time. When you're talking about somebody you're basically brought into a cult, okay? Chabad doesn't want to be called a cult. There are plenty of academics that will say it isn't a cult. There are plenty who will say it is. But the reality is you're basically in a cult. It's functionally a cult, whether it technically is or isn't. And everybody views something in this way, so you view it in that way too. It doesn't mean you believe it necessarily. It doesn't mean that your neighbor who's your friend stops being your friend. It doesn't mean that you view somebody as being a lower creation. But the theology says that. And for me, it was something that I understood, I believed on one level was probably true, but it didn't affect me in my daily life in any way. Except in that I would never have dated a non-Jewish person or something like that for the various reasons that the Jews are not supposed to. But I wouldn't have.
So how does the chosen people idea and Abraham's seed and all that stuff feed into this?
Well, that's part of what it is. It doesn't really feed into it. That's the root of what it is. And again, this is a twisted way of looking at it. Jews are chosen not because we're better or because we're bigger or because we're smarter or anything like this, none of which are true. We're chosen because we got stuck with it, basically. You can look at it that way. That's, if you read the stuff, that's it. You know, you were the unlucky people that God chose. That's pretty much, you know, everyone thinks it's a great deal. It's not a great deal. You want to get up in the morning and have to worry. You got to pray by a certain time. You got all these prayers you got to say. You got these little boxes to fill in you have to wrap on your arm and put on your head. You've got to, you know, you can't shave. You got to, all right, you can shave, but not this way or that way. And you got to be at work at 9, but you can't pray any later than, you can't pray any earlier than 7:30. And it takes an hour to finish, and it takes 2 hours to get to work. And how do you do this? And what do you do? And every day is this kind of stuff. You can't eat in a restaurant because there are no kosher. Who the hell wants this stuff? I mean, this is nuts. If you look at what it is, this is not, that's what you're chosen for. You're chosen to be like, you know, we're supposed to be the priests to the nations. Well, think about what Catholic nuns used to do, if you're familiar with that. You know, how they would, they're sometimes the whole orders, their service would be praying, you know, they pray in shifts, right? And so they would sit there and be praying in Latin for hour after hour after hour after hour, and then it would shift to another group, and then other nuns would go off to do their laundry and clean and do some cooking and whatever. Then they come back for their second shift and pray for hour after hour after hour. I got to tell you, for most people, that is not pleasant. Okay? You know, you can say what you want about serving God. You can say it isn't pleasant, okay? It's not pleasant when someone else is always telling you what to do. It's not pleasant when there are rules that you have to follow all the time. And they're not the rules that you have to follow. And there are many more of these rules, and they involve how you tie your shoes, how you put on your shoes, how you take off your shoes. I mean, people don't realize this. You got to put your shoes on in a certain way. You got to take them off in a certain way. You got to tie them in a certain way. You got to button your shirt in a certain way. You have to, I mean, you put your clothing articles on in a certain order. I mean, this is insane. Now live this for a while. Okay, it's sure you get used to it, you do it, whatever. But you still, if you didn't grow up in it, you still have to subsume yourself to it. You still have to become subservient to it. And you never really get to a point when you fully are. You always know that you're doing something, even if you don't think about it in a profound way. You're always doing something that no one else who isn't an Orthodox Jew has to do, and then add Chabad stuff on top of that. I mean, it's nutty. It's insane. But you know, hey, you know, that's what the chosen people is. We get to do all this stuff. We get to be quote unquote holy and a light unto the nations. And then God eventually, at some point, sends down the Messiah and says, huh, good job, I hope that was fun for you for the last 3,500 years or whatever it's going to be. I hope it's sooner than that. But, I hope you guys enjoyed it very much. Have a cookie. You know, that's basically, that's basically what it is.
What about the notion of being a Jew is born of a Jewish mother? Is that genetic, racial? What's this? What's the
well?
core of this?
The point is that in biblical times it was probably viewed as a Jewish father, not as a Jewish mother, and it switched in early rabbinic times for reasons that involve understanding certain biblical passages. That's all it is. What is it? Racial? No, you had to determine. I mean, you think about it. Think about it in a rational way. If a woman is pregnant, and you don't know who the father is, and the baby is determined by the father, what's the status of the baby when the baby's born? Is the baby Jewish or not? She was raped by a non-Jewish guy or slept with a non-Jewish guy, and she also slept with a Jewish guy. And you have no way then to tell. Okay, so the baby comes out looking like Shaquille O'Neal or something, okay? All right, so you say a pretty solid chance the kid isn't Jewish, right? But generally you look at it, you have no way to tell. The kid's life, you accept him as a Jew, the kid's gonna be, 13, 14 years old, people are gonna say, he doesn't really look Jewish, right? And you say he's not Jewish, and then you either have to convert him or he runs off and becomes a non-Jew or whatever ends up happening to him. People are always going to say, he's really Jewish. You can see, look at him, whatever. So the logical, rational thing was to go after the mother when there was no other way to determine paternity, no way to determine paternity. So if the mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish. And I think that despite the fact that there are biblical passages that were played with and ways to look at things that brought it to that state, I think the reality is that it was, because of there was a lot of interpollination. It was the early era of Hellenism, and I think it was basically the rabbis going, how are we ever going to keep this straight? Because they just sort of started around then also. And it was, we'll just go after the mother. We'll find a way. And I think that's what they did.
Could you talk about the Chabad telethon?
Sorry.
When I went to UCLA years ago, and right a block from the...
Bring out the dancing rabbis.
And John Voight, the actor, was involved.
Yeah, he still is.
Is he still?
Oh, yeah.
Why on earth would he be involved? What's that
Okay.
all about? How do they get all these people involved?
Okay. I have to preface this by saying that I know it's Rabbi Kunyan's telethon out of California, of Los Angeles. One of his sons I knew from when I worked in Israel, and he's now the producer of the telethon. And so I have to preface it by saying a little disclaimer that I know them a little bit. Basically, it started because he needed money, because he had a lot of different Chabad houses open, because there were a lot of Jews in California, a lot moving to Chabad all the time, a lot of new areas opening up. So on the surface, it was, basically a good thing. Reality is, the guy's basically a thug. He's not a nice person, and I've never heard anyone say he's a nice person who lives in those communities and has to deal with them. He's the guy most likely to have a baseball bat and come after you to break your legs. He's a tough, nasty SOB, and. But he produced what became a pretty high quality telethon relative to the resources they have, where he got a lot of people like Jan Murray and Dick Shawn and John Voight, who isn't Jewish, but the others are, and lots of other famous people to come on and do a little number or show a little bit to get people to write a check to Chabad, which was then split. If you got it on your cable station in St. Paul, Minnesota, if you got it on and it ran at the right time and the right agreement was negotiated with a California rabbi, with Rabbi Kunyan, then you got a percentage. They had it worked out by percentage. Then it came from, I think, later where the donation came from, but you could get, you get some of it then. But basically, it went into California Chabad. The drug treatment center was supposedly the major beneficiary of it. The drug treatment center was always billed as being non-sectarian. Truth is, it was non-sectarian when they needed to fill beds. When they didn't have a problem filling beds, it was a hell of a lot less non-sectarian. And it is what it is. Why is John Voight involved? Everybody needs a cult. Everybody needs something to hold on to. And, if you're a guy who Christianity might be interesting, but didn't really, whatever branch you grew up in doesn't really grab you anymore, and not much is moving you, and you meet a happy guy with a black hat and a beard who dances funny and who tells you a whole lot of things, most of which might not be true, but you have no way to find out, and kind of gets you involved, and maybe you'll make a quick cameo. You can help me out. You don't have to do much, and you come and you have a great time, and you're dancing with the guys. They put a funny little silk-looking cap on your head, and your little yarmulke on your head, and you're dancing around, and boy, that was fun. And come over Friday night, have something to eat. You see a little bit, you see the family, you realize what you don't have in your life, what you wish you had in your life. And in those days, his son and daughter, from his first marriage, Angelina Jolie and her brother, were living in Paris, I think, with his ex-wife. And I'm sure that he missed his kids, and he had family, he missed that whole idea. And then here you have these people who seem to have so much fun, and look, there are bottles of vodka on the table, and hey, no one's uptight about that, and people come in stoned, you might have a musician showing up who's clearly reeking of dope or whatever, and and no one's saying anything, and you're going, wow, these are cool for religious people, you know? And you get involved. And that's, I think, probably what happened to John Voight. It had all the morality he was looking for, the family structure he was looking for, and so he got involved as a non-Jew and stayed that way.
Who are some of the, I've seen some famous names who have studied with Chabad. Do you know some of these people?
I mean, like Bob Dylan or whatever?
Has he? I don't know.
Yeah, for a time, briefly.
What, Laura Schlesinger? Didn't she study?
Yeah, I think briefly. Yeah.
Are you not keeping track of all these?
I try not to. But why did they get involved? The same reason John Voight got involved.
No, I guess, no, what I'm getting at, or what I'm curious about, is how widespread or how broad Chabad
No,
is.
what Chabad is very widespread in the sense that, not that it has a lot of adherents that are doing all the stuff I talked about. They're not getting up in the morning worrying which shoe goes on first, and doing all the other stuff you got to do, right? That isn't what they're doing. But they have a lot of people who are made to feel whole in terms of their Judaism, in terms of their spiritual life, even if they're very, very much not whole, by a guy with a black hat and a beard and a long black coat, whose first name is Rabbi, who is very supportive of where they are at that particular moment in their Judaism or their spirituality. And that makes people feel special. So you can suddenly feel special when somebody says, you know, just take these 2 candles and every Friday night you light them. Here's how you do it. You look in the paper and you see whatever it says when sundown is, so you count 18 minutes backwards from that and you light the candles. You make these 2 blessings, or this 1 blessing, I should say, in that. And that's it. And every once in a while you call them up and you say, hey, there's a holiday next weekend, so the blessing is different. Or here's, you know, or you send them over a challah, you know, a Sabbath loaf or something once in a while. And you let them know that they're as much a Jew as the big rabbi is. That they're as much a part of everything as everybody else is. And that little act of lighting those candles might be the thing that makes the world finally be good. That it's what can flip it from being an admixture of bad and good to all good. Right? So that you raise these people up, whether they be celebrities or just some guy you met on the street, into doing something holy with their everyday lives, even if the only thing they've changed is that every morning they get up and they throw a nickel or something or a penny in a charity box, no matter where that charity box goes to. They believe that they're now part of that bigger thing. And because of that, they have a strong affinity and a strong like for Chabad, even though if they looked at it with a critical eye, if they looked at it honestly, they'd probably see a lot of things they didn't like. But they won't do that because this is the connection. This is the guy that made them holy. This is the guy that made them whole. And I guarantee you, when you're in Hollywood, when you're in the music business, when you're doing this stuff, and you're surrounded by some of the wildest things and some of the worst things that you could ever be surrounded with. And I'm not talking about the simple morality play of, look, there are naked women over here or whatever, right? I'm talking about anybody who's ever worked in the music business has horror stories to tell about getting ripped off, about getting lied to, about getting cheated, about royalties being stolen, whatever. And the whole business end of these creative arts are often terrible, right? And everybody knows it, and they're all suffering from it in one way or another, even the people who do it, even if they don't realize, even as they're stealing from people, right? So you can, by getting them to light these candles or say this one little 2-line prayer or put a coin in a charity box or whatever, you can elevate them to doing something good and to be part of that greater good. Now, it might be done honestly with the hopes that the bad things will fall away and more good things will be done. Or it could be done simply to draw somebody in because they have money and fame, and you can use them to raise more money, and hopefully they'll give you money, right? Or a combination of both. But that's how it works.
May I bounce back to your website? How do you get all these contacts to start? Do you have a range of contacts for? You're sort of a private news and individual news organization.
Because I've been doing it for a long time. I've been doing it for 6 years.
So you have contacts? Do you have like former people in Chabad?
I have people that are still in Chabad. I have
They're in
people that are
contact with you?
sure.
They'll feed you information?
Occasionally. Early on, I had a lot of people in Chabad saying, write about these other Chabad guys who are doing this horrible thing. I used to get a lot of that. the messiness fighting the anti-messiness, this group fighting that group. So I'd get, oh, write about them, they're terrible, they're doing this and this and this, or they're doing whatever, I used to get a lot of that, but no, but I still get people inside that want to tip me every once in a while.
What's their motivation? Just like you say.
Sometimes it's completely straight. Sometimes it's just outrage at something that's going on. Sometimes it's revenge. Sometimes it's the same thing it always is, the war between the so-called anti-messiness and the regular messiness. That's.
I saw on your website the Jewish Forward has named you one of the top 50 Jews in America.
A couple years ago, yeah.
Would you discuss that? What's that? How? That's a pretty big honor. How? Why? What the heck? I mean, is that a?
They did it, I think, because of the Postville coverage, primarily. I'm glad they did it. Why they did it past that, it was a nice honor. Being profiled in the New York Times was nice, which happened this year.
Oh,
Yeah, in January of this year. Heb magazine naming me to the Heb 100 was a nice thing. I mean, that anyone would ever be on the forward list and the Heb list at all in their lifetimes, let alone in the same year, is like an incredible thing, because Heb is like this very hipster-oriented, trends very young, trends very young magazine, and the forward is kind of like the New York Times of Jewish newspapers, and it's older and more staid and more less hipster, less hip, right? How the same person who was then, I think, was like 49 years old or 50 years old, how I then got named to both lists in the same year is like,
What's been the general response to your website then? Is it fundamentally noted in the Jewish community and aspects of that? I mean, is there any broader? I
tell you what I hear. I hear a lot from journalists. When they're working on a story, I'll get an email asking for help. Can you call me? Can I call you? Whatever. And I'll deal with people I've dealt with from pretty much any publication you can think of note. And they're overwhelmingly very positive about what I do, find the website very helpful, and these are people who often write positive stories about Chabad or even about the Rabashkins, but they find the reporting I've done in the collation of what other people have done, so it's all together, is very, very useful and very important. So all throughout, from the raid onward, from the 2008 raid onward, I mean, any organization you can think of that covered it has used my website as a significant resource. And I generally get very positive, responses from them. Interestingly, the New York Times was the one that wasn't doing it. People told them to. They were interviewing. Have you talked to this guy? Have you interviewed him? Have you looked at his website? And they just didn't, have a clue in the beginning that it even existed. Excuse me. And they checked, and then they started using it too.